and Jessica. And just to set the tone so everyone knows who's here, what they do, about them, I'm just going to tell you a little bit about Jessica Chang and Richard Kirby. So Jessica is the CEO at the largest home daycare network in the US called WeeCare. Before WeeCare's founding, Jessica worked in finance and operations and gathered experience in early education through owning Los Angeles preschools. So we're going to dig into Jessica's story, how she came to be the co-founder and CEO of the largest home daycare network, which is a pretty big title, and she's got an impressive story. And Richard Kirby is general partner, co-founder and general partner at Equal Ventures. Prior to co-founding Equal Ventures, Richard was an investor at Venrock, where he led seed stage and Series A stage investments in 6 Sense, Amino Apps, Beckon, Burner, Lux Valet, and Salsify. Before joining Venrock, Richard was an investor at Institutional Venture Partners, where he focused on identifying and evaluating later stage investments such as Dropbox, Fleetmatics, Pop Sugar, Shazam, and Yext. He's also got experience in the investment banking division of Credit Suisse. And fun fact, he's a proud Georgetown alum and Rabbit Hoya's basketball fan. So now that we're clear on who's in the room and who we're hearing talk, let's get started. So Jessica and Richard, thanks so much for being here today. Excited to have you. And why don't we just start from the beginning and talk about how each of you arrived as startup co-founder and CEO and venture capital GP.
I'll let you go first, Jessica.
Okay. So obviously we're in the industry of childcare. So this is probably stems from more so my own personal passion, but as I was actually at a startup when I got pregnant. And to be honest, most exciting thing, way harder than what anyone ever says. But when I actually got advice from friends, it actually came down to being like, hey, look, you need to find your childcare solution immediately because it is a jungle out there. Like you have wait lists, the costs are really expensive. And at one point or another, during this journey of finding childcare and touring childcare, I realized that I might have to make a hard decision between my career and starting a family. And as a female entrepreneur and someone that is a type A personality, that frustrated me so much because I was like, well, why do I have to make that choice? And why is it that just because I want to start a family, that there are no real childcare solutions that actually work for me? And if it doesn't work for me, what about the single moms out there? And what about those that have to work 2 or 3 jobs just to make it? What do they do when they have kids? And because of that, it led me to a long journey of actually trying to understand what was fundamentally wrong with the industry. And to do that, I actually started to get into the actual preschool business. So not only was I a mom of kids, I was also a preschool owner and saw the other side of it where, preschool teachers are only getting paid $20,000 a year. And they literally have one of the hardest jobs and underpaid jobs in any industry. And so, yeah, they're leaving the industry completely. And that understanding really kind of came down to be like, well, I wanted to start WeeCare because not only am I trying to solve it for other families when it comes to helping them find affordable and convenient care, but also I want to help providers. And a lot of those providers, 97% are females, and over 75% are actually minorities too. So really kind of coming to that angle and be like, how do I create a sustainable early childcare solution? And really where that came to be was home daycares and starting a tech company that was really focused on that home daycare industry.
Awesome.
Pushing it over to you, Richard.
Nice. No, appreciate that, Jessica. And mine is way less interesting. And so, I graduated from Georgetown University and then went to do investment banking, as Alexandra mentioned at the beginning of the session here, and didn't really enjoy it very much. What I did enjoy was just like researching tech in general, and then investing whatever little dollars I have, my bonus, into public markets. And so I figured, what's the best way I could try to marry my passion for tech and investing into one? And then honestly did start Googling, and venture capital kept coming. It was kind of the best way to marry both paths. And so I tried to figure out how to navigate my career path to that industry, and was fortunate enough to get a gig at a firm called IVP. It's a later stage fund in the Bay Area. Think of them as writing checks in the $30 to $50 million range, so pretty large. And while I was there, was fortunate enough to work on our investments in companies like Dropbox, Shazam, Fleetmatic, CX, the Pop Sugar Network. And there I learned my passion for venture, but also didn't love late stage. And for me, it was the fact that we were investing in these companies that were pretty far along, and we weren't really being that helpful or additive. It was kind of like, hey, we invested, now just go make us money and come back to us once you're done. And I wanted to kind of get closer to the founder, learn more from the founder, and also be helpful to the founder. And so I thought the pathway for me meant going earlier stage. And so that's what I started to do. So left IVP, joined a firm called Venrock, was there for 5 years, leading Series A and seed investments there across both the Bay Area and New York mostly. And then, after a while, just realized, you want to do things your own way. And so to do things your own way, you probably have to do it, on your own or in a new state, basically. And so left Venrock and started Equal with my co-founder, Rick Zullo. And here we are today. And so it's a $55 million fund based in New York, investing broadly across the United States. And real focus for us is co-leading seed round. And so that's been my short journey.
There's a theme here of marrying interests, passion, skill set, but also if you wanted to get it done, build it yourself, which is very impressive. And Jessica, I think it's wildly impressive that you came into childcare with questions and a need and couldn't find it, so you just created it. You're like, fine, I'll solve it, and then I'll solve this problem for those people within the doers, the workers, the builders within childcare industry, so they too can have adequate access and salary and lifestyle. So that's impressive. Jessica, can you talk a little bit more about your early days at WeeCare and what prompted you to seek venture funding, or did venture funding find you?
So I think, when we started WeeCare, it was hard because, it's like saying like, hey, this is a really big industry and there's multitudes of things that you can do, but it's very broken. And each year that passes, it's going to be more and more broken. And COVID has made it like 10 times worse, to be honest. But I think that was really where we said like, hey, maybe this is why we wanted to raise capital. Because if you look at most childcare companies that have been around for a while, it took them 20 years to get them to a point where they made a small dent in the industry. And yeah, you could do that slowly, but like if the situation is getting significantly worse, you don't have 20 years to wait to solve this issue. It needs to be solved now. And what venture funding allows for us to do is really give us that capital to be able to quickly get to that point and affect more people and really affect change for a lot of families. That's why we decided to take capital, because we had an idea that truly needed a lot of capital to actually be able to take on. And we wanted to do it quicker, and we wanted to do it in a way that it had the biggest impact on families. In the early days, I would say the hardest part is just starting, trying to figure out what is your business proposition that you're trying to do, what is that model that you're really trying to build, and really figuring out like what is actually sustainable. Like I think for us, because we're also mission driven, that question keeps coming on. It's like, well, we need to know that our business model works, but it also needs to impact those that really need it, like families that are low income, and providers that aren't getting paid enough, right? So I think that was probably our hardest journey, was continuously going back to that mission and saying like, are we still doing that?
So approaching it with intentionality and continuing to iterate so that you can stay current and continue to solve like an ever evolving need, right?
An ever evolving, especially during COVID, right? Ever evolving, changes by the minute need.
Yeah, yeah. And WeeCare has been integral in the COVID sort of lifestyle shift that we've had in providing, care, right, for essential workers and for those individuals who are working from home, even who still need childcare.
It looks like everyone just caught on to the trend that we were saying, like, hey guys, don't you want to have your childcare right next to where you live? Turns out everyone wants to work where they live now, so it makes a lot more sense now.
No, absolutely, I get it. Before we get into the two of your relationship, personal nugget, when I was a child, I was lucky enough to go to daycare across the street from my mom's job. So I commuted with her on the train, and she would pick me up after, and that proximity was very, very helpful for the both of us. But enough of that. How did you two first connect in terms of, founder, funder, and what was that interaction like?
Yeah, I think, Jessica and I, we first connected, I want to say it was in 2019, maybe late 2019, via Eva Ho. Eva's a GP over at Fika Ventures, another Los Santos-based firm. And yeah, she introduced us, I'd say, called fall of 2019, when Jessica and I first connected. And, we spent a lot of time with Jessica and her two co-founders, Jesse and Matt. And at the time, the business focus was a little different than what it is today. At the time, it was much more focused on building out the WeeCare marketplace, which we all know today to be, the largest network of in-home daycares in the country, which is awesome. And the focus today now is much more around corporate benefits. And so enabling employers who, as Jessica mentioned, only during COVID realized that childcare was an issue for their employees, are now trying to figure out ways to solve for it. And many of them are turning to WeeCare to think about how to solve that challenge for them. And so that to us was like a pivot that made a ton of sense, because you have a company that's already built out meaningful supply from a product standpoint, and that supply is being, really, it has strong demand from the employer standpoint, but the employer had no solution yet. And so WeeCare said, hey, we got the supply, demand's coming to us, let's build the product for that customer. And that's really where we got excited to kind of dive in. And so we actually invested, I'd say, roughly a year after we initially met. And so even though our initial investment happened during COVID, I actually had met Jessica, Jesse, and Matt before. I had been to their office, even though there was a gap in between that initial meeting or initial couple meetings and our actual investment in the company, which happened earlier this year.
Jessica, what was your experience like going through that journey, that year-long journey? What signals went off for you that was like, Equal Ventures is the investor for us? What feelings did you have? Was there a trepidation during that long? A year is a long time to be in conversation and in talks.
I think for us, we want to get to know who are getting vetted, right? So that's like, when you're thinking about it, your relationship with your investors should be like, you're literally getting married to them, because you work on your job 24/7. This is your passion point, and you want the person that is joining you to have that same type of passion point, right? And in order to do so, there is a period of time where you want to get to know them and really truly be like, hey, I don't really like just want money. I want someone that is going to think about my business just as much as I think about it. And I think that initial connection with Richard was great. And I was like, yeah, like he's seeing eye to eye. He's also having a kid at that time. Now he has a kid. And so there's a point of like, you're in that same, you have that same passion point, and you also have that same pain point as well, right? But it takes time. And what I really appreciate from Richard was that he was there and consistently there, saying like, hey, by the way, like, have you thought about this? And what about like thinking about through another issue? And when COVID hit, let's all be honest, it was a big detriment to childcare, right? And as most companies, as most startups, we're just trying to figure out what is the next thing, and how's our government going to respond, and how's that going to affect us, and what's going to happen to our industry. And to be honest, because of COVID, we discovered corporate benefits. We understood that like, hey, look, the brunt of all this childcare issue has been put on parents and providers. And it's unfair. The industry is completely being crushed. And what we realized was that, like, hey, look, just like two legs of a table, it's not stable. If you had a third leg and that ended up being employers, it creates stability. And I think Richard really helped us see that. Was like, hey, look, there's a whole industry of employers that are now looking into childcare and saying, this is what we need. It's not something that was a nice to have. We need to have this to get employees back to work or just help them to become more productive. There's a stat out there that says, like, prior to COVID, only 7% of employers actually had any type of care benefit. And post-COVID, 42% are either looking or have already instituted a care benefit. That's almost 1 out of 2 employers that have said, this is a necessity. And for us, we were in that right position, and Richard really helped us see that we were right to really take advantage of that opportunity, but really help employees, because now employers can also pay for the cost of childcare.
Yeah, and I think also I'd add there is that, we were able to kind of both learn from each other, because in that time period, I would, let's say, suggest things to Jessica, and she'd be like, you know what, great suggestion, but like, you're wrong. Like, that's not important. And vice versa, and so having that interaction back and forth, I think, and when you can get comfortable with someone, you're not afraid to suggest X, Y, or Z based on the response, I think is a great thing. And also be able to see Jessica and the team weather COVID was impressive, because, you take a look at their end customer at the time, which was a in-home daycare or daycares period. They were shutting down for good all across the country. And I can't remember the exact stat. I'm sure Jessica can correct me here, but like, it's something like 90+% of WeeCare's daycares were able to stay open, which is awesome. That enables parents to go to work because they don't have coverage for their kids and so forth. And so that was impressive to accomplish, despite being under-resourced and having the whole world crashing down on them. And so when you see a founder and team able to kind of show resilience through that time period, it becomes harder to not want to invest.
Yeah, and I mean, that's, first of all, that's an incredible stat for WeeCare.
It might be even higher, actually, honestly, but yeah, it's great.
But calling out, to everyone on this call, the importance of the right fit for an investor, for a startup founder, right? Because it's more than capital, but you two have built a partnership, and where you've, Richard, been able to identify opportunities and advise, and Jessica, where you're comfortable to say, like, yes, thanks, but no thanks. That's not, great suggestion, but that doesn't necessarily work. Or, on the flip side, with the COVID example of, really taking an opportunity and running with it and having it contribute to further success of your business. I am going to pause before I go into my next question, because we have a raised hand. So I'm going to let them come up and ask a question. Siri, I said that right?
Yeah, thank you so much, Jessica and Richard, for creating the opportunity to hear more about what you're building together, as a founder and investor team. My question for Jessica is, you said that many of the providers in this space do tend to be folks who are minorities. And at least for myself, growing up in an Asian household, there were things that were culturally acceptable in terms of my childcare that might not be acceptable to folks out there. So in vetting folks to be providers on your platform, especially in your early days, what sorts of KPIs did you look at, or how did you go about, balancing this new business that you were starting and wanting to get people on your marketplace while also being sensitive to, how they might be caring for children and kind of how they might be caring themselves and those types of things?
Yeah, I think earlier on for us, it's still to this day, we care a lot about quality. And it's a little bit hard you can't really measure quality, right? So some of the KPIs that we're looking for in early stages, we built a really robust platform for providers, like a business in a box tool set, and we would measure the usage of it, the weekly active usage of that, because the more the people were able to use the platform, the better they were to able to kind of take off the operations from themselves and actually focus on childcare. So that was kind of one of the earlier days, like, hey, that's an important measurement, because the more they used, and we kind of gamified it, the more they used, the more we would send parent leads to them. And therefore, as those parents went, they loved the daycares and vice versa, and it would work, right? So that was like an early KPI that we used as a judgment of like, how do we continue that quality indicator? And as soon as we saw that like things were clicking and people were utilizing it, that's when we started to scale up providers and knowing that the platform actually helped them.
Thank you.
Thanks, Siri. Thinking about Jessica and Richard, your relationship thus far and things that you've learned from each other, what has been the most valuable experience for each of you up to this point?
Yeah, I mean, Jessica and I are in like constant contact, whether it's text, phone, email, all the time. And it could be a variety of things. It could be fundraising, it could be recruiting, it could just be customer adoption, customer intros, et cetera. And so I think interaction has been awesome to have it consistently. I think it's important, particularly as an investor, to find ways to almost like force communication with the founder. And so, what we do with all our founders is have every 2 weeks we have a call no matter what happens. And so obviously Jessica and I talk more often every 2 weeks, but that's like the longest we'll go effectively. And the purpose for that, at least in our mind, is that founders are insanely busy. Like they've got so much going on, so much they're trying to solve that they can't take the time to figure out, okay, I need help with X, Y, and Z, so let me go call Richard. They don't have the time to think about that. And so that time every 2 weeks is a forcing function for me to then say, okay, Jessica, what is keeping you up at night? What is keeping you so busy? What can you get off your plate? And that enables us to understand where the challenges are in the business and how we can be helpful. And so that, I think, is an important point that we find a lot of value in. Hopefully our founders do too. I realize I didn't answer your learning question, but I think for me, it's really been, I guess, twofold. One is better understanding the nuances of childcare from a provider perspective, as well as from an employer perspective. And so, employers want to make sure that they can have the most broad coverage for their employees as possible. But it also has been able to get understanding around like the competitive dynamics of the space. Jessica mentioned, it took 20 plus years for companies to get to scale. Thinking of folks like a Bright Horizons, which is a very, very large company. You mentioned, Alexandra, at the beginning of the call that your mom would take you to work with her because her daycare option was near work. If folks don't go to work anymore in person, having a daycare option at work isn't as exciting anymore. And so learning those nuances that should be like obvious, but you have to hear it from someone who's in it thick and thin every day, I think has been super helpful. And then two, I think it's been really understanding different styles of operating, right? I think you can have a portfolio of 20 different founders. I guarantee none of them are all the same. And it's just understanding what resonates with some teams versus other teams and how folks can be helpful or not. And I think that's been great. And the last thing I'd say is it's also been a little different, even though we met pre-COVID, we haven't been able to really interact in person very much because of COVID. Actually, only one time because I'm in New York, she's in LA and so forth. And so we did have an in-person board meeting in, I think it was July or June, Jessica. And it was great because we had dinner together, we had drinks together, we hung out beforehand and afterwards. And that interaction is always a great time and definitely pieces that are missed given the environment.
I think from our end, because we're so in the weeds every day of operating the business, like sometimes you're like so focused on the details without kind of looking back and being like, okay, how do all those details kind of come together? And is it really, are we heading into that right direction? So I think, one of the biggest things I learned is like, we're trying to really predict what's going to happen in the future before it happens, right? And having Richard there is kind of like, well, these are the things that we're seeing, that we're learning about, and how does WeeCare fit into that picture? I think, as we said before, like corporate benefits has been really exploding for us, and in a good way. But it is a very new thing. So we were previously very focused on our marketplace. Now we're focused on really B2B, right? And kind of relearning that has been really helpful with Richard, who's seen companies already build into this, and having that experience be like, okay, well, maybe I should be talking about to benefit brokers or strategic partnerships, because that can streamline our growth. So that's been really good learning for us, is like this, like B2B side is pretty new to us, and having an investor that has experience in there makes it a lot easier for us to kind of navigate through that.
Awesome. Wendy, can you bring up Diane Schrader? I believe Diane has a question.
Hey there. So Jessica, when you started your conversation, you talked about the fact that you had to choose between childcare, and participating in a startup just based on where you're at. And then I think it's really interesting to contrast the fact that you're, a mother of young children. And then here, Richard, you have young children as well. So we have a mother, and a father. So the first question for you, Jessica, is, I don't know if there's a father figure who's also involved in the childcare choices in your situation, but it feels to me like if the product was positioned for parents who are partners in choosing childcare, then it's not so much the burden of just the mother. So I'm wondering, especially as we think about kind of the next generation of parents as being a bit younger and not having maybe those same social norms that would have forced just the mother to think about their career, if that might also be a different way of positioning your product in the marketplace.
Yeah, so my husband, we had like lots of conversations about what happens when we start a family. And to be honest, both of our family, like usually you're like, well, grandma and grandpa can help. But both of our families are actually, were and still are located in Asia. And there wasn't the availability of our friends' family network to kind of rely on when we couldn't find care. And ultimately, it was a joint decision between me and my husband, but ultimately it came down to, well, who was making more money? And therefore, who gave up their career was based on who was making less money. And unfortunately, that was me. And a lot of times, unfortunately, that is also women, right? So I think, when we think about our product, it really is for families, right? We don't ever say mom, we always say for working families, for parents, right? Because you don't know whose situation someone is experiencing or how their family dynamic operates. What we're caring about is generally the future of work has changed, right? And people are looking for remote or flexible. No one really works a 9-to-5 job anymore. Let's be honest, right? That's like the previous notion. What we created WeeCare for was to kind of address that. Like, what can we do to help it become really convenient for families where you're not situating your life because of childcare, right? It's like for parents, that makes like total sense. For non-parents, doesn't make sense yet, but if you're going to become a parent, you'll understand it very soon. It's like the morning pickup, the afternoon pickup, and the activities. That's how your work schedule kind of goes around. But what we cared about was like, hey, look, every family is different and everyone's schedule is different. So we made it so like it's a lot more convenient if your childcare provider is your next door neighbor, right? And then also, because they located themselves in a home, it's also a lot more affordable, because that's another thing families have to struggle with is affordability. Usually childcare costs literally up to about 30% gross income of what families make. It's usually more than rent. And if you have 2 kids, forget about it, right? So that was another question that we really want to be, regardless of where your family dynamic is or what social status you are, childcare should be affordable to you. And so that's what we did too, was like the other great part about home daycares is they're generally 40% cheaper than a preschool. So it becomes a lot more affordable for families. And it's not just well, you can pay for it and that's why your kid got childcare. Hopefully that answers your question.
It does. I think that, again, the framing of this can mean so much to the parties on the other side. I do have 2 children, and I did have a startup when I had my children and such, and I was able to afford to bring on a nanny and such. But I think that, seeing even the dynamics of all this is really challenging. But I do think that it's so helpful when both parents are engaged and both parents, if there is, and by the way, there are a lot of families where that's not the case. It just isn't the case, and being able to support them as well is tremendously important. But I think engaging both of them in that process is helpful. And if you ever want to have a conversation offline about how I got my husband involved, happy to share, because I think I think there's also a generation of people who, before they go into parenting, think that we're progressive and that we're able to move in this direction. And yet when it comes time, these are very hard choices, and they do, impact careers and such. And so I think being, more in the marketing and just in genuinely more embracing, of both parents and such would be really helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Diane. Thanks, Jessica, for shedding more light on your approach with WeeCare. And I think it's wonderful to, as you mentioned, to position towards parenting, because parenting absolutely, as you stated, looks different for everybody. So I think that is, kudos to WeeCare for being mindful of that. And we have another raised hand. Missy. Did I say that correctly?
Yes. Yummy.
That wasn't. Oh, I was like, that didn't sound believable. So please correct me. I was like, yes, no, correct me, please.
No worries at all. It's Yemisi, but feel free to call me Yummy while I'm up here.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes. So I'm gonna lower my hand for now, but I did just want to kind of, Jessica and Richard, you all have an amazing founder-funder relationship. I don't know if anyone else is feeling that in the audience, but it's just been really awesome to hear about how you all have been able to just work with each other. Even the 1-year courting process, although that does seem like a long time, I think it's great because you were able to just learn more about each other. I guess the one question I do have is for funder relationships, or I guess just between, founders and their venture capitalists that aren't as close. Are there any strategies, Richard, that you've seen, or even Jessica, for maybe your other investors, where you've been able to cultivate that relationship, especially during a hybrid world? So whether that is having like very detailed founder memos or just doing something, because I think sometimes you can like take the money and then kind of forget about all these people who are backing you and rooting for you. So how do you keep the VCs and the angels and all the supporters you have engaged?
Yeah, no, I think you kind of realize it in that courting process, whether it's a week, a year, a month, whatever it might be. You kind of get a sense for the founder relationship. I've definitely invested in some founders that, going into it, they're kind of like, I do my own thing. And Rich, you may be able to help them, but like, I don't really give a shit. And so I'm just going to go do my thing. And then there are others that you can tell from like when we have like these like strategic discussions with Jessica and other folks in the team that like, they want to push on that, because ultimately, their viewpoint is, I probably can get Jessica, I'm sure can get a long way by herself too and have great success. So like she wants to optimize for the biggest success possible with as much support as possible. And hopefully myself and every other person on the cap table can provide that. And so I think you kind of understand where folks are while you're making that like fundraising process, understand what that relationship will be like. And then I think ultimately though has to be able to, if they will demonstrate that you can provide some sort of tangible value, because if not, then a founder will kind of, I think at any point in time, dismiss you as maybe a waste of time, or will move on without you. And so I think that's the case too. And so I think that hopefully we're able to kind of shed some light how we could be helpful. And that's why I think, Jessica and some other founders in our portfolio engage with us. But I think if we don't show that, it becomes quite tough. And then, I'll let Jessica speak to how she engages other folks, because she's got a lot of resources around the table on herself too.
Yeah, I think for like, just as we are really busy, our investors are really busy too. So if you don't speak to them or contact them, they also don't have time too, right? So it's like, I think the way that we do it is, on a quarterly basis, we like send our investors a highlight of what happened in the quarter. But what I think is the most useful is actually the ask. Usually you put it on the bottom of the email. It's like, this is my ask, and no one really scrolls to the bottom. But it's being intentional with that and saying like, well, these are things that we know we can't do by ourselves. And our investors, the reason why we initially took their money is because each of them holds a special thing that we took as value, right? Whether that is introductions to other investors, or the ability to hire, or PR, whatever that you were looking for at that time. Just kind of having that and remembering that, or in my case, having an Excel to make sure it's like you can go back and be like, this is why we took this person's money. Well, because they have X, Y, and Z, right? And being intentional. So the emails that I send out, I will ask specifically of my investors for things that I know that they can add value to us, and being very intentional on that, and knowing what their specialty is will get them to reply, because they're like, well, I know that investor really well, or I'm really good at PR, right? So I'm gonna specifically answer that question.
Yeah, I guess the last thing I'd say there for Yemi is that it's really about self-selection, where founders self-select with the investors they want to work with, and vice versa. And so I know there's some founders that only want to self-select for entrepreneurs who don't want to talk to them, and they do that. And some folks do the exact opposite. And so it's finding whatever is the balance that you think you work best with as a founder and as an investor. And then hopefully you can find alignment between those two when you're raising each subsequent round going forward.
Thank you, Yemi. Thanks, Richard and Jessica. We have another question from Jennifer Saxton, who asked, Jessica, can you give a few examples of asks you made that got you, that you got a positive response to?
I just want to say hi, Jennifer. Jennifer and I know each other pretty well. I think the biggest things that, especially when I think about PR, like we're not great with PR. I will be honest with you, as a company, we're not great with PR. And some of our investors are really great at it. And specifically, for example, I'll just say we really want to specifically talk to a lot of female-founded companies and really specifically support their childcare benefit program, right? So one part of it was asking our investors, like, look, we've got great investors. They've invested in great female founders, and those companies have gone on to raise a D, E maybe of series. They're big now. Can you make that connection for us? We already know that you're an investor, so you definitely can. And therefore you kind of answer that question yourself. So great positive response, because we specifically had a PR strategy to target female-founded companies. And we, in the beginning, really targeted a lot of investors that specifically invested in female founders. So that, like, knowing that, and knowing that we could definitely get an introduction led to a positive response.
That's helpful. I see my childcare situation as the pack and play in my guest room office. Luckily, there's no baby in it right now. But I just sent an investor update last night, and I always write something in that ask section, but like nobody ever replies to it. So I'm clearly not asking the right things, because usually it's like, oh, I'm looking for a contact in the baby department at Amazon or something like that. So are you doing those asks like in your broad updates, or are you talking about like specific asks that you're reaching out to people for?
Yeah, so in the broader update, probably not. Like the broader update, just because not everyone has that specific criteria looking for, I straight up just text message them and give them a call. Be like, I know you're connected to this person. Can I get an introduction? And that happened just the other day. I was speaking actually to Eva, and I needed a connection to technically an Amazon like competitor. I was like, I know you have that. And actually, I know your husband used to work there too. So can you make that connection? And she was very happy to. So, but it took some digging. So.
Thank you. I love how engaged everyone is. We've got another question from Av. I hope I'm saying that right, Ree. So in New York, where are places female founders can talk to investors so we can get to know them as people first and informally? So Richard, I'm assuming, Jessica, jump in if you have ideas too, but Richard, I'm assuming that question is.
Sure. Yeah, I think harder for like a formal place given COVID right now. I think people aren't gathering as much in person, but I think it's, focusing on investors, I should say, that are intentional about investing in female founders or female-related companies. I think that's what we've seen work best. And so, whether it be via Jessica, the folks, fortunately equals in that camp of folks. And so I think it's really targeting investors that you think are wanting to invest in female founders, period, and foremost. And I think the best way to look to find that is look at their portfolio. And if you find a portfolio that, there's not a single female founder in there, don't go talk to them. You're going to waste your time. And I think it's just in general about preparing to fundraise as a founder. It's really about targeting folks and trying to find as few ways as possible to waste time. Because a lot of investors will take meetings because they want to learn about whatever it is you're working on, but they'll never actually commit to anything. And so you want to weed those folks out very, very quickly. And so whether it be, folks like ourselves, whether it's Female Founders Fund or other funds that have, great female founders across their portfolio, just look at that page and that will give you a sense of who you want to meet with, interact with, or look what they're saying online, because folks are obviously pretty public these days about what they're wanting to invest in. Because people will tell you publicly via their website or Twitter or whatever it might be, what they'll invest in, even if they don't say it outright, you can kind of get a hunch for it. I find a lot of founders waste time with investors that were never going to invest in their company in the first place. And so I'd rather founders not waste time with folks like that. And it could be us at some point in time, it could be somebody else, who knows. But we found that same mistake ourselves when we were raising for our fund. Our viewpoint was anyone who has money is someone we're talking to. And then we realized that a lot of folks don't invest in first-time funds. A lot of folks don't invest in seed funds. And so we spent probably months talking to people that we should never have spoken to. And I think that applies to founders as well. And so that's just one thing I think about. It's a roundabout way to answer a question, Ab, but hopefully it makes sense.
Oh yes, go ahead.
I'm gonna add just a little bit to it. Richard's really right. We scoured Twitter and looked at every investor, what they were talking about, if they tagged any other female founders or they tagged industries that they were very interested. We looked at Medium articles, right? A lot of investors write on Medium. They write articles specifically talking about things they want to invest in and are very intentional about it too. So it's if you find it and you put it down, it's hey, I need to make sure I track this person down and talk to them. That's definitely ways to kind of get to that point. For specifically female founders and getting to maybe investors that you might not know, there are a lot of actually femtech groups out there. Both Jennifer and I are actually part of a femtech group as well. Join femtech groups, lots of female founders that have raised a lot of capital too, that know investors that invest into female founders. Probably those are going to be the easiest, and it could be a very a warm introduction versus those that are just straight out cold introductions.
Yeah, the only thing I'd add there too is don't limit yourself to New York. In this remote Zoom world, feel free to access anyone that may be. So don't worry about New York or LA or SF. Just be as broad as possible in terms of find the right fit, because you never know. Even let's say you connect with Jessica and Jessica's not the right person, she might know the right person. And so keep that broad aperture.
I think that's, excellent advice. And, to sum it up, time is precious. All of our time is precious, regardless of what seat you sit in. And, finding your people and knowing your people and staying true to your mission and yourself and being able to find that. So I appreciate that each of you can echo that sentiment to our founders who are looking for their proper, investors. Av, if you haven't already, I would also suggest that you can sign up for the All Raise New York chapter to be on part of that listserv, and they have founder funder walk and talks that are very, very casual, and it's a perfect opportunity to just meet people and get to know them, as you said, as people first, and gauge sort of where their focus is. We have questions flying in just a few minutes. I'm going to try to capture them all. From someone on the phone, it says, we've been pigeonholed and labeled as a niche market just because we're a Muslim company. However, just like Chick-fil-A is Christian-owned, our leadership and wellness techniques are for everyone. We've pitched to several investors and here, sounds great, but I don't know anything about the Muslim market. what would you recommend to remove the mislabeling and pigeonholing? Great question.
Yeah, I think a couple things. One is, I think once again, it's investor targeting. And so I think, trying your best to find, let's say, Muslim investors who already know how large of an opportunity it is. And then two, I think when thinking about your like TAM, you can find ways to broaden it. Like I looked at this company, must have been a month or two ago, and they were really focused. It was like basically a Asian grocery company. And their viewpoint was, yes, Asians buy Asian groceries, but so do other people. And you could look on the stats, and you could see obviously lots of people who aren't Asian buy Asian food. And there are lots of people who aren't Muslim that, benefit from the wellness activities of this company. I'm not sure what the company's called, but, you want to find ways to naturally expand your TAM to make it much more, lucrative in minds of folks that don't quite understand it, because most things are bigger than people realize. It's about how you frame it. And so I think framing it in a way to demonstrate how widespread the behavior or usage you're trying to encourage via your product is going to be pretty important there, because once you find someone who actually understands that nuance, they'll get pretty excited pretty quickly and help support you.
Thank you. Let's see, next question. I love that some of you are also answering questions for folks in the chat. So this is great interaction. Viviana Hurtado, Dr. Viviana Hurtado asked, any insights, Richard, on how to square a targeted outreach strategy with overall relationship building? No one has time, yet I hear it's like dating.
Yeah, I'm assuming this is like particularly with investors, I'm guessing the relationship building. If so, yeah, I think, it's trying to find ways to engage with folks in a less time consuming manner. And so, Jessica mentioned she would scour Twitter to see folks commenting there. Engage with folks on those platforms. It's a lot less time consuming than traveling somewhere, sitting for coffee, and folks are way more likely to engage in an area where the lift is a lot low for them. So if like responding to something on Twitter is a pretty low lift versus having to schedule time to meet someone in person. And so finding low lift ways to engage, I think is pretty important. I think too, back channeling. And so finding folks that that know them can give you a sense of like, okay, is it worth meeting Richard or not? Is he wasting your time or not? And so forth. And vice versa. Like, is he the person I should interact with in the first place? Like, is he helpful? Is he nice? Do I want to engage them or not? Those are data points you can get from other people to limit the number of people you need to go after in the first place. And then, yeah, I think, try to engage them on, some sort of low lift channel is probably the best way to avoid the whole dating atmosphere effectively.
Thank you. We're going to keep this rolling because we've got 6 minutes. Siri actually asked one of my questions that was intended for you, Richard. Anyway, what kind of traction do you look for in marketplace businesses at the seed stage? But we can also expand that to, what signals a good investment opportunity as well.
Yeah, I think it's hard to answer that one. I think traction can vary wildly based on the type of marketplace, type of company. And so, at the end of the day, the thing that we put first and foremost in we want to see from an investment perspective is the team. And I think we try to understand where the founder's passion is driven from. And usually it comes from like one of two ways. One is they've been working from their career perspective in a space, and they know it so intimately well that they understand the nuanced insight to solve some particular pain point. And so that's like a career-based passion. The other lens we see is it's like a personal-based passion where, some event in your life has driven you to want to solve some particular problem. In the case of Jessica, it's actually both. She was passionate by solving the pain point of having to solve for childcare for her own children. And two, she had been running a couple of daycare centers in Los Angeles. And so she had it from a career perspective. And so those two like variations of passion really gets excited because it shows dedication to the space. Usually comes with like nuance, understand the category. And three, if you combine those two things, it usually means that when like tough obstacles come by, you and your team aren't going to fold to it. And when COVID came by for Jessica and WeeCare and the team there, they didn't fold because they were so passionate about what they were trying to solve from multiple dimensions. And so that to us is first and foremost outside the traction piece. Probably a roundabout answer of your question, Siri, but I guess the other thing I'd say is we've invested in companies that had not launched, and also companies that had been launched for 3 or 4 years. And so that's why it's hard to give a definite answer there.
Thank you.
Thank you. And for the final question before we wrap up and give you guys some things to part with, Jessica and Richard, a fun question, easy question. Can you name 2 things that have gotten you through uncertain times as a founder and as an investor?
You want to go, Jess, or want me to go?
If you got an answer, I'm going to let you go. And then while I think about my answer.
I don't, but I can get one. Yeah, I think 2 things for me. It's one, just having a support system, whatever that support system is for you, is super important, because you want to not be alone when you're going through any tough time, whether it's personal, professional, or anything else. And I think the second thing is, believing in yourself. I think you can combine belief in yourself plus support from, folks outside yourself. You can kind of hopefully get through most things. And I guess you don't too, but I think the third one for me is, I think everyone in this room looks like they've been around the planet for a decent amount of time. And so we probably all have experienced some pain all across multiple dimensions, and we're all still here, right? And so I think the last thing that I think about when I see those tough times, that like, it's never really as bad as you think it will be, for the most part, not every single time. And so that also allows me to kind of push through on those dimensions. And so I think I asked for 2, but maybe 3. Hopefully that works.
So mine are slightly more different, because my sanity is always at question. So date night, if you are parents and you're a startup founder and you're just busy all the time, you need to make sure you have time for yourself. And that date night doesn't mean like with your partner. It could literally be you sitting in front of like a TV and watching the worst like soap opera ever or something. It doesn't matter. It's just time for yourself, but schedule time for yourself. Not like, hey, like I'll think about it and I'll continue to push it. Like my partner and I, we have date night every Wednesday and Friday, and it's scheduled. We never move it because it keeps us sane and continue to go forward. The second point is actually very similar to Richard's, like a support network, but that support network I think is different because you have friends. Your friends might not understand what you're going through, right? They're not startup founders that have highs and lows every day, like literally to the minute, right? And sometimes talking to your partner might not also work because they've been they're just like, I don't want to talk to you anymore, especially during COVID. So actually having a network of specifically friends that you've targeted that are very much are in the same place as you, because some days you might feel like you're a failure to yourself, to your partner, to your kids, to your job, all at the same time. And having a small support network that really understands that and can relate to that helps you kind of be like, okay, it's okay. They're going through the same thing. I can get to the next day.
Awesome. So to close out, before we bring Wendy up, and she shared a survey link in the chat, I just want to give Richard a few moments. Richard does some incredible work with a anonymized comp survey that just takes a look at how those in the investor spaces are being compensated. And we always say you can't measure, you can't change what you can't measure, you can't fix what you can't measure. So Richard, I'm just going to pass that over to you so you can share with folks what you have with the survey.
Sure, I'll keep it pretty quick, but for the last, I don't know, it's been like 7-8 years or so, I've been running this venture capital compensation survey. And so the premise is really around helping folks like myself in prior years who were junior at firms who didn't know if they were properly compensated or not, and want to see the disparity in pay amongst men and women and Black and white investors across the board. And so been doing that for 7 or 8 years now. It's gotten to decent scale now, and fortunately, and now I think it's the most widely used survey for folks in the industry, and it's been great to kind of see it grow and find folks that have gotten value out of it. And so we've just kicked it off again for this year in partnership with All Raise, and so looking forward to having hopefully our largest survey ever this year. And so that's it on that front.
Thank you. Thank you. So if you would like to participate, you can click the link that Wendy put in the chat, or if you have folks that you think it would be useful for them to participate, you can pass that along. This is an ever growing, everlasting community. Thank you, everybody. Wendy, I'll let you take it from here.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. And as Alex mentioned, the conversation was so fantastic. Thanks for all of your input, your questions, your thoughtfulness. Jessica, Richard, thank you for taking time out of your schedules to share your journey with us and the All Raise community. We will follow up with all of you with the recording. We'll make that available for those who want to rewatch it. And be sure to, I posted 2 links, one to Richard's survey and one to our event survey. We'd love to get your feedback as we continue to make more of these events available to our community, and always looking for thoughts and ideas on how to make them better. With that, have a great afternoon, rest of your day. We'll see you next time. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Bye.